Okay, have a great day, everyone. This is an online YouTube lecture recorded live by teacher Noy Gonzaga. Okay, this is lecture number 4 for general ethics. Okay, so let us set our attention straight now as we begin our online lecture. So we are tackling now applied ethics. This is lesson 4 for ethics for general education. So what is an applied ethics? Now we will first start with our divine provision or our text, which is found in 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of the Lord. Meaning, dear students, we can always do what we want to do. But the question is God happy with what we are doing? That's always the basic question we need to ask. Because yes, we may have the freedom to do whatever we want to do. But as created beings, are we making our Creator happy? So whether you eat, you drink, you defecate, you're playing, you're studying, you're dating, ask yourself, are you doing this all in the glory of God? Okay? So our text is um, very clear in reminding us that above everything else, we have a God to satisfy and a Creator to prove that the creation is much more like the Creator. Now, according to Bertrand Russell, he said, we have in fact two kinds of morality, side by side one, which we preach but do not practice, and the other which we practice but seldom preach. Now, let us first go to the first one. We preach but we do not practice. Okay, it's just like in a community when you say, there will be no loitering. Okay, example, if you're a community administrator, say there will be no loitering. Okay, no, shall we say, beyond 10 o'clock in the evening, there will be no loitering already of students. But you permit your children, you permit your villager to loiter during that time just because they're staying in the village. So we try to preach no loitering, but we do not practice it. That gives us the idea that there are secret cause or there are people who have special attention. On the other hand, we may practice, but we seldom preach. What is this? Okay, so we practice loitering. Okay, and then because we are doing loitering, so we do not preach it or we do not teach it because we know we will be hit by it. Okay, another is, okay, example is one announcement I have seen in the campus wherein we cannot drive anymore without driver's license. Okay, so if this is a law that we preach, this should also include all the children, all the family members, all the people living in a household, that they cannot drive our vehicles if they do not have driver's license, because that is what we preach, and we should practice that. It's useless to preach that people cannot see that in us, because people will say, why do we need to follow if the one himself preaching that do not follow what he is teaching? So this is always principle wherein we walk the talk or we preach what we teach. So this is what Bertrand Russell is trying to tell us, dear students. Okay? So before requiring everyone to follow something, follow it first. Okay? Like with the teachers, before telling your students to pass their projects on time, to pass their requirements on time, pass your own requirements on time first. Question is, have you passed your grades on time? Have you passed your paper requirements on time? Why? Because we can only preach what we teach. Okay. So I hope these two kinds of morality um, will not make us responsible. Will not make us very irresponsible as professionals and as students facing these ethical challenges. Now, going further, let's go to the next page. This time, let me explain to you what is applied ethics. So, applied ethics is also called practical ethics. It's also called application ethics or a real world ethics or the ethics of action. Now, practical ethics attempts to answer the question of how people should act in specific situation. Now, let me qualify this fact, dear students. You cannot practice practical ethics if you do not know theoretical ethics. Remember that always. When people will ask us, okay, is it possible that you are good in theory, but you are not good in practical, or you are good in practical, then you are not good in theory? Well, my answer is you can be good in theory, but not in practical. That is being lazy because you don't want other people to know that you know. But you can never be good in practical if you do not know the theory. The question is, how will you apply what you have not learned? Say example, you are a nurse. Now, how will you know how to put a catheter if you have no knowledge of that, no theory of that? Okay? So in that case alone, it is very impractical to say that there are people who are good in practical and not good in theory. That's very impossible. That's magic. You have to know theory first before you can do something practical. Okay? So erase that from your mindset that there are some people who are good in practical, not in theory, or good in theory, not in practical. It's absurd to be good in practical without knowing the theory. There are no shortcuts, dear students. Remember that always. Now, for example, is it ethical for a business owner to bluff during negotiations with another company? Okay, when I say bluff, you also do not know what you're trying to say. For example, um, our company can provide you everything. There are no other companies that can do this. Back in your mind, you know that your company has limited access and limited capabilities also. But you are trying to win an investor. You are trying to win a possible business partner. Now you are winning in a way that you are cheating. You are winning in a way that you are trying to tell them some things you do not even know, some things you do not possess, some things that is not existent within your own area of specialization. That in itself is called unethical because we only present people with something we know, with something we possess, and with something that we have. Because in the long run, if they discover that we are telling them things that we do not actually know or things that we do not have, they will lose trust and eventually leave us in the process of proving that we are actually dishonest people. So always remember when you apply when you use practicality in your profession, remember that practicality should be backed up with theory, should be backed up with what you know. Because if you try to tell people that you know and you do not know, people will begin to distrust you. And trust is a big word in a community where professionals stay. When there is loss of trust, that means there is also loss of professional relationship. Remember that always, dear students. Okay? Now, here is another situation. Is it morally permissible for a doctor to engage in mercy killing when a terminal cancer patient begs to be put out of her misery? Well, we may argue that patients can sign here their autonomous right to decide for themselves. Okay? But as doctors or as nurses, we should explain to them everything first. Okay? From the um, from the painful facts to the possible effects. Now, after explaining everything to the patient, after giving them all the possible data that they know, that is only the time when the patients will be able to use their practical ethics because they already know everything about what will happen in their decision. Letting the patient decide without letting them know what are the possibilities between those decisions is just like trying to say, letting the patients do the practical side of things without knowing what will happen to them, without knowing the theoretical aspects of their decision. So if you come to think of it, it's a kind of decision that cannot be considered as valid because in the first place, a person deciding without knowledge of his decision is considered a false decision right away. Okay? So I hope you bear this in mind that there is really no shortcut to practicality. The only way there is to learn the theory. Okay? Now, what are the challenges of applied ethics? Okay, challenge number one. Applied ethics will always have problem with accepted moral standards of some systems and culture, as there are always variations that may be moral to some and immoral to others. Okay, so let us try to give some examples here. Remember, morality is dependent on the person at the very basic and collectively as a culture. That is why there are moral standards that are morally accepted to some culture but are not accepted to another culture. That is why there is no constance in this argumentation, dear students, making this point a great challenge in ethics. Ethics can have a standard as per written in laws, protocols, but morals are subjective. So let us try to give a little example of this. So example, you learn, okay? You learn about something in your practice, in nursing or in other fields. Okay, let me cite, okay, example, the sample of blood donation or blood transfusion. You learn that it is what life saving. You learn that it is very needed so that the body can recover from past injuries of bleeding. But you cannot deny the fact that some religions, okay, do not accept blood donation, do not consider blood transfusion even as ethical. So in this aspect alone, you are trying to impose a medical reality towards people who have different beliefs than you, okay, which you cannot force because culture is personal, culture is subjective, okay, then this can be called the, a challenge in applied ethics. As a professional, you know blood transfusion is very important. But as a religion, as a culture to your patient, they will not accept that one. Now, reality is we cannot move also as healthcare professionals or as healthcare ethicists or as professionals in our own aspects. If the people we are facing, if the people we call our customers, okay, have different ethical standpoints. This is now what we see as one of the greatest challenges of ethics when culture becomes a hindrance to the application of ethics itself. Okay, I hope you understand this one. Okay, even if you know what is right, if the person you are facing would not accept that as ethical to himself or herself, he cannot do anything but to just tell them what is ethical. But practically, it's their own decision to follow or execute that ethics. That is the limitation of applied ethics sometimes when we are using it in social and public dispositions. Now, second challenge of applied ethics. In the application of ethics, we can also see probable challenges in age gaps, generational approaches, and at times too young and too old clusters. Well, this is not new. So usually, the generationally old, technically called the geriatrics, are acting in a more conservative way. The generationally young, technically called the pediatrics, are acting in a more liberated way. Variations will always lead to challenges in application of ethical actions, such as there might be a confusion of what is acceptable or not, wrong or not, and so on. So here in the second challenge, we're talking about age. There is a possibility that what is acceptable during the past decade may not be already acceptable, or shall we say, technically viable during our time. Can we give an example to this? Okay, now you're trying to say that wearing shorts before in the 1970s, especially if it's shorts that is way above the knee, that is already considered as taboo or shall we say unethical because that's too short already. You're already putting other people's ethical probability in the wrong place, meaning you are tempting other people to do wrong. But today, when you wear um, shorts, and then you go to stores like 7-Eleven, okay, or Midnight Market, people will not mind you because shorts is just normal, okay? Wearing a pants during the time when the climate is too hot is in itself what? Unethical, or is in itself impractical. So this is where now we can try to see that generational problems can also interfere with our application of ethics because what is right during the time of your parents may not already be right during our time. Okay, so that is one way of looking at that. So when we meet challenges like this, let us try to explain to the people the essence of the ethics that we are trying to apply, not necessarily the physical structures of the things that we apply. Okay? So This is what we call generational challenges in applied ethics. Okay, going further, let's go to the third challenge of applied ethics. What is this? Okay, it is not a new fact that societal acceptability will always change or will have deviations. Let us always remember that times change and people's adaptability also undergo changes. So, what are the points included here, dear students? Societal tolerance can be very important before in the olden times, but as modernization strikes in, this tolerance was observed to be more patient. At some points, it is not only patient, rather, it is already very tolerant. During your teacher's time, Sir Noy, as a student, deadline is always a deadline. Okay? Teachers will really impose the red ballpen mark on you if you do not meet the deadline. Today, teachers are considerate because there are other reasons to leave some deadlines. So let's not go very far already. Let's not go very far. Okay? Um, during the time when your teacher was still a student, deadlines are really deadlines. Okay? But during our time now, we become more tolerant because number one, students are now more busy, more financially challenged, or shall we say, more diverse when it comes to priorities. So, applying strictness may sometimes put education at risk or education in in a secondary structure. That's why on my part as a teacher, I'd rather I'd rather extend the deadline and get a better output from my students than impose the deadline and get nothing from them. Okay, which is contrary to the practice in the olden times wherein whether or not you have output, if it's deadline, it's the deadline. So if you come to think of it, there are already changes in the application of ethics, in the tolerance of the time or tolerance of the system. Applied ethics will always have concerns with social based norms. It is not a new fact that societal acceptability will always change or will have deviation. Remember, time and people change. Okay? Now, during the time that teacher Noy is studying, students really want to get educated because they want to work. Today, we are facing students that are forced by parents to work, are forced by parents to study. So if you come to think of it, the ideation of the people in the past is to really study because that is their future. The ideation of the people today is we study because we get allowance and our parents is forcing us to study. So there alone, you will say that there are societal and social differences in the perception of the students in terms of applied ethics. There alone, you can say that the tolerance of ethics was challenged. Okay? So, culture, age gaps, as well as societal acceptability and tolerance can be a great challenge to practical ethics. Now, going further, let us try to see some real world and applied ethical principles, okay, in this part of the lesson. Come to think of it, one of the ways wherein we apply ethics is when we apply the law. Now, who are making the law? Okay. Now, here you will see the Philippine Constitution, Republic Acts, executive orders, presidential decree, administrative orders, institutional laws. They are arranged in proper order, dear students. The Philippine Constitution is always considered the highest law of the land, that even the president and all elected officials are subjected to it. This is the only law when you can say there are no people above the law. So who is making the Philippine Constitution? Even the people making the Philippine Constitution are elected. You have the Constitutional Convention and the Constitutional Assembly. You elect them to make laws. So that means they are far higher than the executive of the land, which is the president, the vice president, and other people. They're subjected to the Philippine Constitution. Now, the second law there is what we call Republic Act. The Republic Act are actually the laws that are passed by the Senate and by the House of Representatives or the Congress. So, The problem with our Republic Act is if the Senate pass a law and the House of Representatives or the Congressman does not like it, okay, the law does not become a law. In like manner, if the Congressman made a law and the Senate do not like it, it will never become a law. Now, another twist to that is if the congressmen and the senators agreed to pass this as a law and the president felt that this law is not useful, the president can veto that one and still the Republic Act cannot become a law. So Republic Acts being the second highest law of the land, okay, doable in a certain time being without election or without people choosing to make the law is the hardest law to make, okay, when you are an elected official. So you have to be sure that the congressmen, the senators, and the president like the law before the law can be passed or signed by the president for execution or for practical usage. How about executive order? Executive order, okay, if you come to think of it, the president has um, special services under his um, his office. You have the Secretary of Health, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Tourism, Secretary of Public Works and Highways. Okay, these people are not really existent in terms of personality, but they are called alter ego of the president or the representatives of the president. So, in their own departments, when they see some things that they need to change, they make a suggestion to the president, and the president will read this proposal, and if the president will approve this, this will become a law. And this is called an executive order, meaning it's the alter ego of the president who is actually suggesting this law, and the president is the one who approves it. Well, the presidential decree is really laws that are made by the president out of his own ballpen and out of his own mindset at Malacanang Palace. Now, how about administrative orders? Administrative orders are laws that are what? Being made by our society. Okay? So, what are examples of administrative orders? Maybe you have orders coming from civil organizations, okay, semi-government organizations, non-government organizations. Those are administrative orders. And then you have the institutional laws, the laws of CPAC, the laws of the Boy Scout of the Republic of the Philippines, the laws of the Pathfinders Club. That is your institutional law. So if you come to think of it, this is of the order of the laws in our country in terms of respect. Now, if the Republic Act is in contrast to the Philippine Constitution, automatically the Republic Act loses the case without contention. If the presidential decree, okay, is in conflict with the Republic Act, automatically the presidential decree will have no valid details to argue with the Republic Act. That's why institutional laws of CPAC, if they are not in compliance with presidential decree, executive order, Republic Act, or the Philippine Constitution, there is no use of fighting that because it will lose anyway. So the appreciation of the correctness of the law is in this order, with the highest, the Philippine Constitution, as the one that will be followed without contention if other laws um are opposing or are not in the same line with such laws that are being mentioned by the Philippine Constitution. A very good example of this is the freedom of assembly. Sometimes we prohibit people from gathering because we think they are forming fraternities or what. Okay, if you stop them without proving that they're doing something wrong, that is against the Philippine Constitution. Because the Philippine Constitution tells us there's a freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So gathering is a freedom of expression, a freedom of assembly. So if you prohibit that one without enough reason that they are really fraternities that are doing destructive things, you are disobeying the Philippine Constitution. Okay? And if you file a case against court regarding this, for sure you will not win the case because it directly hits the Philippine Constitution, which according to our study, all the laws on top of the other subordinates the other or what defeats the other. So always remember this application of laws, their students. Now, applied in career, courses, and profession, where each discipline of study has different needs and focuses. Career courses will refer to nursing, engineering, psychology, and others. But remember, while there are internal and course-based ethics, all of these ethics still rank lower than government laws. So this is what I'm trying to tell you earlier. Okay? Now, the School of Nursing may have their own laws. The School of Business may have their own laws. Okay, the School of Theology may have their own laws, but if these laws disobeys the laws of the college, they will still be defeated. If the laws of the college disobeys the executive order, the college will be defeated. If the executive order, okay, will disobey the constitution, it will still be defeated. So this is how we view things. We can always make laws for our organization, laws for our department, but it is our responsibility to know that these laws are not contradicting the Philippine Constitution, the Republic Act, the Executive Order, because a conflict here will directly tell us that the one who makes the laws or approve the laws are irresponsible people because they have not spotted these conflicts. We don't want laws to go against each other or cancel each other because laws are made to organize and not to disorganize people. So remember that always. If you have laws in the nursing department or in the engineering department or in the psychology department, that is not those are not laws of finality. You still have to ask, what is the law of the school? We might be right in our department, but we might be wrong in the concept of the school rules. And then going upwards, okay, with the school to the presidential decree, with the presidential decree to the executive order, so on and so forth. This is how we appreciate rules as applied in terms of the practicality of ethics. Okay? Now, applied in chosen association organization where each member share the same principles and often the same actions and programs. Okay? So we have also some organizations out there, like the Rotary Club, the Red Cross, school organizations, school papers, student governments. They have their own rules. But you have to know again that these rules will only be correct if it does not violate the rules of the higher organization in terms of the Central Student Council. You will have a law of yourself, law within your organization, but be sure it is not transgressing the rules of the school because the school is the higher organization that covers even the Central Student Council. So remember that always. Yes, you have association rules, but the question is it not violating the institutional rules, the administrative rules, the presidential decree, okay, the executive order, the Republic Act, and much less the Philippine Constitution? So again, the responsibility of practical ethics applied here is when you're making the laws, always remember to consider and study the higher laws, that these laws you're making should not be in direct contempt or in direct violation of them. Okay, now here we'll be proceeding now to the 7 principles in applied ethics. The first principle here, okay, so the 7 principles of applied ethics is similar to the 7 universal rights of men, but we will discuss this, of course, in the ethical view of things. First, you have the applied principle of autonomy. Now, autonomy is defined, okay, now, applied ethics is concerned the person's autonomy and it should not be neglected, okay? This is the applied ethical principle wherein individuals have an ultimate authority to determine what happens to their lives and to participate in decision-making process that will affect their lives. So the ethical points here is, when can one lose their autonomy? When can others make decision for another person? What are the standards when it comes to age and condition of allowing a person's autonomy? Now, let me first proceed here to the lecture of autonomy. Now, let us simplify autonomy. Well, the meaning of autonomy is this is the right where one person cannot and should not be deprived of his own of in his life. However, there are some exemptions that are clearly stated. So what they're trying to say here is Autonomy can be exercised by a person if he is a competent person. We will discover later on what is competence. Now, this is a right where any other people cannot violate if a person is proven to be a competent individual. Now, the actual right stated a person who is 18 years old and above who has no medically and psychologically diagnosed infirmities should have the ethical right to autonomy. So, what is the age that we're considering here? 18 years old. When you're 18 years old and above, you can decide for yourself already, considering that you do not have medical and psychological infirmities. Now, let us try to see what are the exemptions to the rule. Now, the first exemption to autonomy is when the person is 18 years of age and above, yet the mental age is not in congruence, thus having a delay in mental capability such the age may not be clinically within or over 18 years old. So, example, okay, the person is already 40 years old, but the mental age after mental assessment is only 17 years old. Well, that person is still a minor because he might be 40 years old in physical age, but his way of thinking is 17 years old. And what did we say? A person can only be autonomous or free to decide on his own when he is 18 years old and above. And in the case of these mentally challenged persons, they are still 17 in assessment. They cannot make their own decision because they're 1 year still, okay, early to make the decision in terms of their mental age. Okay, exemption number two. Of course, this is very understandable. These are people who are lower than 18 years old. They're considered minors. So the adults, or shall we say their caregivers, their direct, their parents will be the one to make the decision for them. So you have to reach 18 first before you can exercise your um, autonomous right. Then exemption number three, when the person is under medically associated procedures or medication which has effects that will lead to mental distortion or incapability. In the case of number three, when significant healing occurs, it is not enough to grant the autonomy yet, unless they can now procure clearance from the rightful professional who can prove their mental compatibility and coherence. So a good example of this is when you are under medication such as cetirizine, morphine, that can distort your mental decisions. Okay, these persons during the time of the influence of those medications are considered what? Non-autonomous. Okay. Now, another example we also mentioned here, example, the patient suffered from a car accident leading into brain injury. And then it was proven that the decision making was affected because of the impact or the trauma to the brain. Okay. So, when this patient will be healed, they will not get their autonomy right away, not after they will have a written abstract from the doctor that will proclaim that they are already capable of doing autonomous decisions. So, these are some considerations we call exemption when the person is 18 years old already, okay? Yet, because of these exemptions, they cannot let their autonomous right or autonomy be functional. Okay. Now let us go to the second. Uh-huh. The second principles in applied ethics. The first is autonomy. The second is confidentiality. So what is confidentiality? This is the applied ethics principle wherein persons entrusted the words or facts in confidence have the duty to hold this private and not to tell others due to the respect of condition that was talked upon. Remember that applied ethics can be applied ethics, okay, can be applied, but it should have high respect for one confidentiality. So the question is, until where or what are the instances, okay, that our confidentiality can be interfered or can be overpowered by other reasons? Now, let us first have other meanings of confidentiality. Confidentiality is an applied ethical right of a person to require non-divulging of words, especially if that person is normal under the qualifications of autonomy. Again, a competent patient. Confidentiality can be waived or disintegrated if there will be a detrimental effect to the person or may result to other persons that may happen under the circumstance of using confidentiality. The second definition, let us try to um, understand it deeper with the exemptions. Okay, again, like autonomy, we can be 18 years old, but we cannot practice autonomy. In confidentiality, we may also have the right of confidentiality, but there are two exemptions. And if these two exemptions can be spotted, anyone can breach your right of confidentiality. How? Example number one, the fact in confidence can hurt other people. Or example number two, the person will hurt his own self. Okay. So remember always, if the person tells you in confidence, but the secret or the thing that is being hidden can hurt others or can hurt yourself, you can always have the ethical right of telling people to stop this person who is confidentially trying to commit a crime or trying to commit something that is unethical. So again, confidentiality is a right. But when this right will already produce, will already lead to hurting others or hurting yourself, then this right can be what? Interjected or violated because of the point that we need to intervene before this right create a non-right or a violation or an unethical act. So again, what are the two exemptions to confidentiality or to the right of hiding secrets? Number one, do not hide that secret if that secret will mean hurting others. Number two, do not hide that secret if that means that secret will hurt the person keeping the secret. So right, so exemption if it can hurt others or hurt yourself. Okay, I hope that is clear enough for confidentiality, um, dear students. So, what is next? Confidentiality. Next is beneficence. Okay, applied ethics. Okay, no, can be applied and each should consider what is good or beneficial to the people. When you say beneficence, it means doing good or the good faith principle. This is the applied ethical principle wherein there is always a need to do what is good and beneficial in all the actions that we do. Action should be done due to a good purpose because a good purpose will be superior to a good result. Remember that always. This is the good faith principle. Now, what do we mean by this? Okay. Now, when a person is doing a course of action, he has no control over the result of the action, but he has a control of how was the action started. Okay, let me give an example for this. Okay, the person, okay, what will be a good example for this? Okay, example, the person ran after another person. Oh, okay, this one. It might be better like this. The person who found the cell phone on the table hid the cell phone, okay, until the time that he has seen the teacher. Other people might look at it as a form of theft or a form of robbery. But when the person already surrendered this to the teacher and tell the teacher about what his intentions are, those people who are accusing you of robbery or theft will understand that the purpose in the first place is really only to protect the phone, to safeguard the phone. That is what we call so that when there is a case filed against you, which is theft, robbery, or dishonesty, the intention of good faith in the action will destroy the argumentation that you are really after robbery or theft. This is what we mean by good faith. So things in life, if they are done in good faith or in goodwill, they cannot be contested to be bad because even if the result is bad, their intentions of doing that is not bad and it is really good. That is why beneficence is an ethical practice that cannot be contested even if the result is bad. If you can prove that the intentions of the person doing that is good. Okay? Next, you have fidelity. When you say fidelity, this is the applied ethical principle wherein there is a weight in fulfillment of commitments and agreements. Thus, the two K word here will be loyalty and trustworthiness. Applying ethics will always be based on integrity and dignity, which we can only get and prove when we can be trusted. Remember always, people, trust is a great asset in professionalism, in practical ethics. When there is trust, there is fluidity of action. Okay? Now, sometimes you can hear words like, we may not be rich, we may not be influential people, but if we can be trusted, we can defeat these kinds of advantages. However, trust that is being destroyed will have a very, very hard time rebuilding back. Now, in professional setups, trust is a key investment. You can just imagine. I like that nurse because he can really be trusted. I like that accountant because he can really be trusted. I like the engineering firm because they can really be trusted. I like the I like the psychologist because he can really be trusted. So there is an added opportunity and um an added grant if you are not only a professional, but you are a trusted professional. That is what we mean by the applied principle of fidelity. Now, justice. This is the applied ethical principle that is intended to promote equitable and fair treatment of individuals within population. This includes consideration around avoiding biases when sampling from a larger population and not exposing participants to any protocol that could disadvantage them. When I say justice, what is good for Juan should also be good for Pedro in the principle that when it rains, Juan and Pedro will get wet because it is impossible that Juan gets wet and Pedro will not. Okay, now going to the meat of that explanation. There is no justice if in a certain community some rules are only applied to some people who are vulnerable enough for the justice. So example, if you are a faculty child and you are not given the same kind of harsh justice as the ordinary children in the community, of course this is only for the sake of example, then there is no justice there. Justice means what everyone should feel, what everyone should experience, should be experienced by everyone themselves. Okay? Remember that always. So, justice is the practicable instance that there is no one above the law. There is no person above the law. So, the greatest violation of justice is the occurrence of biases. If there are biases, automatically there is no more justice. Remember that always, dear students. Next, you have veracity. Veracity, okay, should be in one line with what is true and factual. This is the applied ethical principle of having the equality of being true or the habit of telling the truth. This means that utterances, actions, and declarations are always dependent on evidences, logic, and facts. Veracity also connotes that things are not true even if it is without evidence. So there are two principles that I want you to take note in veracity. Okay, veracity means truth. You can only have truth if, okay, if you are telling everything based on fact. And then your facts are only acceptable if it has evidences. That's why we have evidence-based practices. So truth, which are not factual, are not considered truth. And truth that are factual, that has no evidence, cannot also be called truth. So in order for truth to be really existent, or in order for veracity to really be considered a principle, there should be factuality and evidence that will happen. Okay? That's good. Now, you have non-maleficence. This is the applied ethics that prohibits doing harm for others. This is the applied ethical principle that indicates that one should not do harm to any. The act of doing harm, even how responsible, is practically unethical. Non-maleficence includes: do not kill, do not cause pain or suffering, do not incapacitate, do not cause offense, do not deprive others of the good of life. Now, I will not discuss very deep into this principle, but I will give you an example. So if you have sworn in as a nurse, the Nightingale Pledge and the Hippocratic Oath, and you also consented to become the state implementer of death penalty, okay, that in itself is what? A violation of non-maleficence. You cannot impose something bad on others, especially if you have sworn into that. Another another consideration here is euthanasia is a questionable practice for people who are considered sworn in medical professionals in the Nightingale Pledge or in the Hippocratic Oath. Okay? Euthanasia is considered a borderline unethical fact when it deals with non-maleficence principle, because you are helping people end their life, you are causing people to end their life, or you are advising people to end their life. Okay? And that is tantamount to letting people do harm to themselves. So as medical professionals, okay, in the medical field, I mean, as in the other professional fields, remember always, permitting harm, not stopping harm, or advising harm are all in the same context, a violation of non-maleficence or doing no harm. Now, we have this already and this one. Okay, now let us go to the applied ethics future points. Okay, similarity is not identical appreciation. Applied ethics is an ethics with special focus on issues of practical concern. That is why ethics in this field is derived from actual experiences, and responsive principles spring up to resolve actual solution. Now, this is what we call sometimes in our practice as, yes, there can be theories, but theories will remain as theories, and you cannot picture out what a theory is until you start implementing it, okay, in practical setup. That's why if you are a teacher, if you are a businessman, if you're a nurse, knowing the theory alone of teaching, business making, or others is just only knowing how it goes. But the feel of doing it will create a different experience in you, okay? And will let you understand that theory itself is not enough. Proving the theory is right is the heart of practical ethics. A good point here is there can be several similar cases, but if you will analyze, similarity is not 100% identical. I believe in this. Therefore, there is still variation in the application of ethics to resolve a problem. A very good example to this, dear students. Okay, example in medicine, two cesarean birth procedures cannot be similar in terms of their presentation and in terms of their execution. There might be differences in the application of cesarean section to two mothers. In like manner, in business, closing a deal, okay, closing a house, real estate sell sale deal to two persons will not be similar 100% in the aspect of selling. There might be problem with the other might be too easy to go to. Engineering, building two houses in the same area cannot just be said as similar in all aspects, as even if it is in the same terrain, same material, there can be different challenges in the two applications that we have. Okay? Not two marital problems are the same, even if the problem has identical facts, such as husband has another wife and family from central family. Well, in this case alone, resolutions can be different and applications of ethics should be individual rather than collective. You cannot say that the solution to the first couple will be the solution to the second couple also, because in the first place, the reasons already vary. So you cannot apply solutions to varied sources, to varied causes. Okay? Now, experimentalism should not be imposed as a basis of finality in applied ethics. Applied ethics is a complicated type of ethics because of the principle that there are no two specific events that is 100% identical, and at some points the variation should have differences in approaches. Again, there are no two things, dear students, that are procedurally identical from start to finish. That's why we have the term case-to-case basis. A good point here is there are theoretical and foundational bases for ethical solutions, but these are based on the probabilities of similarities of occasion, but not 100% similarity. Okay? Like circumcision. Same age, same height, same gender, but one can have complications, the other may be normal without complications. That is how simple that is. Applied ethics will only be true situationally to a specific person. Again, applied ethics does not apply generally to a group of people, but applied ethics will only have one certain occurrence to one person, another to another person, another to a third person, and similarity will just be at some points, but not in all points. That is the reality of applied ethics. Okay, now let me have this closing reflection from Aldo Leopold. Ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when the wrong thing is legal. Wow, this is very heavy. First, let us focus when no one else is watching. Well, it is very common today that some professionals, especially in the teaching profession, they only teach because there are checkers around. They only teach because it is where their salary are being based. They don't really teach because they love teaching. Okay? Now, and the sad thing is, when the wrong thing is legal, what is this? Okay, there are some professionals who have no absence in social gatherings, in worships, in meetings, but they seldom meet their class. In this case, meeting your class does not really mean that other people know that you're not meeting your class. But if you are not joining bayanihan, if you're not joining meetings, if you're not joining social activities, other teachers or checkers will see you. So in this case, you'll be considered, okay, if you're doing your class and you're not joining these other extracurricular activities, you can still be considered as what? Teacher with an ethical applied ethical practice. So the reality is there are really dangers because society will only judge us according to what they see and not really according to what we have in terms of our ideation and our context when we are doing our job. So we can be prone to judgment by others, but what is important is we know by heart what we are doing. Okay? According to Robert Noyce, if ethics are poor at the top, the behavior is copied down through the organization. So here, our leaders have great responsibilities of showing responsible, exemplary lifestyle, responsible, exemplary leadership, responsible, exemplary lawfulness. Because if ethics is poor at the top, you can expect also that there is poorness below the organization. Now, if you see a certain system that the lower part is very poor, you question, is the top part also poor? Because it does not make sense if the lower part is poor and the top part is great. Why is there no ascension? Why is there no reflection? So Robert Noyce is trying to say, okay, what happens at the bottom is a reflection of what the top people are doing. Okay. So here is my message to end this lecture. When ethics remains as a theory or a fact of knowledge and it is not being practiced, it becomes a hidden fact without a consummate effect on humanity. Let us always remember ethics will only be felt in society and will cause change if it will be practically applied, if it will be done by people who needs to do such. Ethics is practice. In practice is the only notable cause affecting ethical occurrence. This is where we see results, we feel results, and we expect results. Thus, we should realize that society needs ethics that are practically done and not just necessarily mentioned or said. If you want the society to be ethical as well, start practicing ethics, for it is in our lifestyle that we will effectively share and contaminate others to be ethical. Let us walk our talk. Let us teach what we preach. Let us do what we say. That is the best ethics that we can do for the system. So thank you very much, dear um, students, for your time. I hope and pray that you have learned well from this lesson that we have. Okay. So God bless. And that is already the end of our Applied Ethics lecture number 4, Ethics for General Education lecture. This is still teacher Noy Gonzaga. And thank you very much for being with me in this online recorded lecture.